Africa was originally spelled with the K before it was colonized. When you know and understand your history as a people, it helps to shape your identity. As African people, many times we have been told that our history started off in slavery in the Americas. But what was our history before Africans were kidnapped and put into chattel slavery during the antebellum period in America? Before there was African American history, there was ancient African history. And what was our history before Africa was actually called Africa?
Ancient African people functioned within dynasties. They were within clans. Later, as Europeans kidnapped African people, they named them as tribal people. African people did not start out from the beginning as being called tribal people. And so once African people came into the various places of the world, they was brought in by so-called discoverers and invaders, people who was masquerading as missionaries. And supposedly they said that they were coming in to the nations to civilize the people. But ancient African people was highly civilized people. They were very academic people and very well educated people. So civilization was something that they was not lacking.
There is a debate in history that civilization began in Europe and or in Rome, really, that the Romans came to Africa or the Europeans came into Africa to civilize our people. And first of all, that's incorrect. I mean, that's incorrect. We had prime civilizations in Mali and Timbuktu and in Egypt and some of the great kingdoms of Africa. We descend from kings and queens. We descend from the origination or the originators of mathematics, of language. And again, I say propaganda and narrative because, you know, even the term Middle East, you know, the term Middle East, well, when I was growing up, there was no term Middle East. Middle East is North Africa. it's Northern Africa, right? And so from there, we are the builder of the pyramids. We are the establishers of the Hammurabi Code, where we get most of our laws. We're the establishers of all those profound inventions and profound ingenuities in that we still kind of utilize or intimate in civilization in regards to from the Fertile Crescent and Mesopotamia, all those different places, the Euphrates. Those are African-based things.
I've actually been reading a book. It's called The Deconstruction of Black Civilization, and it talks about the powerful tribes that were in Africa and how they were all lined up along the Nile River. You know, how they started irrigation, how aqueducts were started in Africa. You know, like these people took a land that was very bad, you know, a land that most people probably could not grow crops on, and found a way to do it.
As black people in America, we've been so indoctrinated with other people's story, and we've allowed them to condition our minds to accept that as if that's our history. We haven't been taught history. So when we're actually saying African history, we're actually saying world history, namely the Nile Valley. And this is not me saying this is scientific fact, this is historical fact. Egypt stands today, meaning our monuments stand there and they've stood the test of time, whereas other cultures have gone and went and died. Egypt is still there. Now, it's not in the control of the original people of that land, which, you know, look like myself. We're not identifying where we're really from. But, you know, Egypt itself is considered the mother of civilization. And when that is, you have to think of what happens in a civilization. You have math, you have science, you have architecture, things of that nature. And this is actual fact. And it's a conscious effort to separate us as black people in America from our ancestry. And that's done on purpose, because if we were to know the great things that we did in the past, I mean, our future is limitless.
Africa was not named Africa originally. It was named Abutilon. And this is what the name was. And so when the European people came in, such as Arab people, Asians, they renamed a lot of things. And so Africa was very a dynamic continent. And I don't see that Africa would be anything that anyone would frown and look down upon, because of all of the people and how dynamic they were and the resources there. All of the diamonds, the gold, the copper, the silver, and in particular salt. And salt was a very valuable mineral during that time, and that was because of African people being in the sun.
We need to realize how important our skin is, why God created us to look the way we look. God created us. The way we're created, melanin is very important.
Melanin is a human normal. It's a normative. It's a genetic normative. Having no melanin is an abnormality. Right? So you can't stand the sun. You get sunburn. We get the energy from the sun. Right? So the narrative, the true narrative history doesn't always work to those who came out of mountains, out of caves. The true narrative of history works for those of us who were embraced by the sun, whose skin soak up the vitamin D in the sun, whose skin don't burn. That you see what I'm saying? That we begin, the darker we are, the more we radiate.
We as Moors, black Africans, came into Europe and we civilized them, meaning we taught them burial rites, how to bury the dead, how to, women how to clean themselves and menstrual cycles. And at that time, if you study Europe, you would see pictures of castles like you see in these movies. They make Europe like it was such a beautiful place, but actually outside those castles, it was moats, it was filth, because they didn't have a sewer system, and the people would literally throw the waste out, and then they would wear big giant boots on their feet because there was so much waste and things in the streets. Well, when the Moors came in, we actually civilized them and brought them up to a higher standard of living. What happened in return was, after they came up that higher standard of living, they actually turned on us.
So I've got to make sure that I make Africa scary, because that's a rich place. And so when history tells the story, I didn't go and take it from an intelligent people who had their own system of law, had their own culture, had their own families. I can then say in history that we conquered the land of savages.
When the Europeans came to Africa and began to capture slaves, they didn't just walk in and defeat these great warriors. They talked to rival tribes. They talked to their chiefs. As a matter of fact, we learned in my history class that they would have to go to the chief of the African tribe, and they would have to beg on hands and knees, on all fours, and beg them to acknowledge their existence. They would beg, they would trade, and then that king, or the leader of that tribe, would then sell them slaves. They would give them slaves. That leader of that tribe did not know that they were going to come to America and be treated completely different as a slave, because in Africa, when they had slaves, it was not based on your race. There was no race. Race is a fairly new concept. It's socially constructed. It's not real, but Europeans have made race to divide and conquer. So they would go to Africa and they would have these slaves, and they would just be people who were conquered in war. They had lost a battle, they had lost a war, so they became slaves. The slaves in Africa were treated with dignity and respect. They were fed well, they were clothed well, they never separated family members, they would never sell a father from his wife or from his children, because there were no racial stereotypes, because there was no race. They come to America and it's a completely different story.